the Sigma 60-600, one of the most unique lenses you can buy. Today we are looking at this incredible lens, the Sigma 60-600. Before I get started, thanks to Sigma UK for letting me borrow this lens for a couple of weeks, and they don't have any say in this review and they don't get to see it before I put it out. Now this video is going to be very much looking at how it could be used in video production. There's plenty of photography reviews of this lens that are out there, so I'm not going to be really talking too much about how it is used in a photography setting, but rather how can it be used for video production. Now it's no surprise this lens is very much aimed at wildlife shooters and sports shooters, as it's such a versatile zoom range for those kind of shoots. I also think it could be very useful for event coverage as well, and what I'm intrigued by is, could you actually use this on corporate shoots, giving you something unique that your clients have never seen before. Let's first talk about the build quality of this lens, and it is built like a tank. It's solidly made all the way around, really nice and strong. Certainly no concerns about using this in harsh environments whatsoever. You've got a very large lens hood on the front here which can come off, and you can of course flip it around to store it and take up less space. The quality of the buttons and the dials, everything on this is just really well thought out and really well produced. Now of course this lens has a huge filter thread on the front. It's 105mm, which does mean buying any filters such as ND filters would be very expensive for this lens. You'd probably be better off using a matte box, although you'd still need a very large matte box opening to be able to use it on the front here. So that does maybe limit certain situations. However, because the high f-stop on this camera, perhaps it's not such a big concern, as you're not often actually pushing the limit of the shutter speed too much. On the tripod foot of the lens, it's actually got an Arca Swiss mount built into it, which is extremely useful. It means you don't need to have a secondary plate. When you switch between portrait and landscape, there's a really nice click as well, so you know exactly you hit the right point to get the right angle, so you're not accidentally fiddling around getting it quite slightly off. So no worries about trying to line things up with the markers. Instead, you just feel it and you know exactly that you've got the right point. 3 customizable buttons around the barrel of the lens, which is really handy, so whichever angle you're using the lens at, you still can access that button for quick access to certain autofocus features, for example. In addition to that, of course, you've got your autofocus, manual focus switch, the focusing ranges, the different image stabilization options on there, and you've also got a custom switch at the bottom as well, once again, so you can set it to do different things in custom 1 and 2. They've also got a lock switch on the front, and that's actually quite important with this lens, as it will creep forward in your bag if you don't have the lens locked down. This lens does have an extending barrel, so you do want to lock it down when you're traveling. Now speaking of the extending barrel, of course you can use the normal zoom ring to zoom in and out, but what's also cool with this is you can actually push and pull to zoom as well. That's extremely useful if you need to quickly go from different focal lengths, from one end of the scale to the next. I can see if you're shooting wildlife or even shooting sport, where you suddenly need to jump from 600 back down to say 100 or 60, having the ability to just quickly pull and push on here is extremely useful. Now just to give you an idea of the size of this lens, here it is compared to a Canon 70-200 with IS. Quite a common lens that you've probably seen around over the years. You've got a good idea of how big one of those are. As you can see, this is a quite bit bigger lens, although you don't really notice it too much when you're carrying around a bag. It can actually fit in a relatively small bag, which I was quite impressed. I was quite impressed even with my small messenger bag. I was able to squeeze in the entire lens with a camera body on it and still close the bag and be able to take it around with me. It is a heavy lens, although once again, when it's actually compact like this, it's well balanced and it doesn't feel too bad to carry. I was expecting it to be a lot more cumbersome to carry than actually what it is, but certainly when you're just carrying around, I've not really noticed it being much worse than a 70-200. It is heavier, of course, but I hadn't really felt like it was that much more impractical to actually carry around. When you do extend the zoom though, that's when it does get a little bit more front heavy. And that's where really doing handheld is not possible, but certainly for video. If you're doing photography, you can probably make it work, especially with the IS, which is very good inside this camera. However, for video, it's just going to be all over the place, even if you shoot at a high frame rate. Unless you're really going to hit the gym, I don't think you're going to be able to get a steady shot handheld. So it does mean you need to put it on a tripod. Now, this is really where the weight starts becoming a problem, in my opinion. The lens itself isn't too bad, especially when using with tiny little bodies like the FX3. It becomes more frustrating when you then have to carry around a heavy tripod as well. A small, light photography tripod or something that's very quick and easy to carry around, that isn't going to work with this lens. It's going to give you far too much shake. You're not going to be able to get smooth panning shots. You need a proper heavy-duty tripod, something like this Miller right here. Now, this isn't the biggest or heaviest tripod in the world. It's actually a pretty light one in the grand scheme of things, but it's certainly a lot heavier than perhaps maybe what a lot of people are used to when shooting with their mirrorless cameras. In terms of the actual image that this lens can produce, I've been blown away by the quality that it can actually capture. The sharpness is incredible. I was expecting it to be okay. I mean, after all, it's a super zoom. It's a huge zoom range. It's relatively affordable as well at just around £2,000 here in the UK, which isn't a huge amount considering the amount of glass and engineering that's gone into this lens and the focal lengths that you're actually achieving. However, despite that, the sharpness is really impressive. In certain photography, yes, maybe there are sharper lenses out there, and of course there's much more expensive lenses you can get out there, but I think for video, this is as sharp as the lens you'll ever actually need. Now, of course, to achieve the size and the price of this lens, the only way you could do that is by having apertures that are a bit slower. So at the wide end, it's f4.5, and then it goes down to 6.3 at the long end. That might sound quite slow. However, actually, when you're at 600mm, it's not really a problem. In terms of low light, these cameras are brilliant in low light. I took it out the other evening, so after the sun had gone down, it's at dusk, and it was still performing extremely well. It was having no issues whatsoever with autofocus, and in terms of the amount of light that I needed into the camera, it was absolutely fine with the ability that these cameras now have. I'm not even sure that you'd want like an f2.8 either on a lens like this. I mean, obviously it would be ridiculous in size, but more of the issue would be, I think, that the fact that it would be very difficult to actually get nailed on focus. When you're at a super telephoto length like 600mm, the focal range is very narrow and it's actually quite difficult to keep something in focus manually. And even in autofocus, you've got to be careful not to lose a person out of frame. The backgrounds also get completely blown out, so I'm not quite sure how much bokeh you really actually need in your shots. Now, I mentioned the autofocus a minute ago, and it has been excellent on this lens. I've not noticed it slowing down or letting up. I certainly was expecting, with all that glass going on in there, that it would be a bit slower than other lenses that I've been used to. But I've got the Sigma 24-70, and this doesn't really feel any slower than that for changing focus. Of course, if you're going from one extreme to the other, there'll be a brief moment there, but I've been really impressed by the actual speed and accuracy that the focus on this lens can actually achieve. Now, I did test, and sadly this lens isn't parfocal. That is perhaps one negative for trying to use this for something like an event or a conference where you want to keep a consistent focus throughout the zoom range. You might be following someone on a stage, or maybe you're at a wedding. That's where a parfocal lens would be extremely useful to have. It is almost parfocal though. It's very, very close, and actually with the autofocus on these cameras, as long as you're not doing extreme jump between focal lengths, it actually can hold a focus pretty well. And probably the person watching it wouldn't actually notice that the focus is going slightly in and out as you zoomed in. The final thing you need to be aware of as a filmmaker if you're looking to get one of these lenses is rolling shutter. Now, of course, lenses don't create rolling shutter. It's all down to the camera that you're using. If you're using something like the FX3 with very minimal rolling shutter, then it's absolutely fine. However, when you go to higher focal lengths, of course, you're going to notice the rolling shutter a lot more. At 60mm, you barely notice the rolling shutter, even on the A7 IV. It's there, but it's very small. However, once you go up to like 600mm, even the slightest movement of the tripod, you're going to get some pretty strong rolling shutter. Maybe not a problem if you're doing wildlife and you can't really tell any straight lines or anything like that. However, anything that does involve straight lines, perhaps maybe filming sports, that could be a problem for you. So be aware about what camera you're actually going to be using with this lens for certain applications. So who is this lens for? Now, of course, I mentioned at the beginning of this video that it's obviously great for wildlife and sports filmmakers. I also think it's a wonderful option if you're shooting, say, something like a concert. At 60mm at the back of a stage at a big event, you could probably get the whole stage in shot, and then you can zoom all the way through to 600 and get a close-up on the stage. I can see that being very useful in a lot of situations. Yes, it's not a power zoom, and yes, it isn't parfocal. However, I do think with a bit of careful zooming on the lens barrel, you could actually achieve some pretty good results. Finally, the whole reason I wanted to test this lens was whether you could actually use it for corporate shoots. And well, I'll spoil you now. No, really, I don't think you could. I think it probably is a bit too big and impractical to use, but I really want to use one. I really like the idea of having really unique angles and really unique focal lengths in my video production for my clients. I think it could be something that could really help us stand out as technology changes and improves. After all, everyone's quite bored of that 28mm focal length that we are so used to with the iPhone. We see it everywhere. So do you want to be really shooting in focal lengths around that range when doing your professional works, especially as the quality difference becomes less and less? What I think is really cool about lenses like this and other ones out there is it offers some really unique looks that you just can't achieve any other way. It creates a whole new idea about actually how would you go about shooting certain things, such as an interview, for example. As you can see in this shot, I was having a go at standing in different positions away from the lens to see if you could do some sort of piece to camera with a very long focal length. And it does create a really cool look with that heavy compression that you're seeing right there. If you could live with the impracticalities of it, if you can justify it because perhaps you also do wildlife and sport as well, then I think you should consider using this lens for some unique corporate shoots. I think you could get some wonderful looks that no client has seen before. Without doubt, this lens meets all its expectations. In fact, it completely blows them. The sharpness, the quality, the build, everything is far greater than I was expecting, considering the price and the overall size of this lens. I didn't think that it would be possible to make a lens with such a crazy zoom range and still be extremely good, extremely sharp, and give you some great results from it. I do though think it will be a tough one for me to justify. I just don't do enough shoots that involve the focal lengths that this lens can provide. However, if you can have the justification for this lens, even if it's tiny, totally go for it. It's an awesome lens to go for and you'll love using it and you're going to get some wonderful results. If you've enjoyed this review of this lens, then make sure you check out my other Sigma reviews as well that I've done, including the 24-70, which I think is one of the best lenses you can buy right now.